So very good morning to you all, and thank you for joining us for this year's advising conference. We're really excited to have you here with us, and we have over 300 participants in over 100 colleges represented, and we are very excited that we have people joining us from 7 different countries. Every year we have a theme, and this year it's been an extraordinary year for us, and I'm sure all of you can relate. And this year we thought we'd like to focus on the 3 C's, that's change, community, and connection. So from technology innovations to adapting advising models, we've certainly come a long way this past year. We've tried things we've not tried before, we've succeeded, and some we've failed in, and we've learned along the way. As higher education institutions around the world begin to open back to normal operations, we would like to see what are the lessons we've learned during this pandemic? What will advising models look like? How can leadership support advising? And how can we maximize the best outcomes of our pandemic responses to create models that foster community and connection while adapting to this changing world? And who better to kick off such a wonderful conference than the very well-renowned Dr. Laura Rendon. Dr. Rendon, welcome to the Advising Conference. We're so excited to have you here. Dr. Rendon does not really need much introduction, but I'm going to try to capture in a few words, the phenomenal achievements that Dr. Rendon has brought to higher ed. Dr. Rendon is nationally recognized as an education theorist, activist, and researcher who specializes in college preparation, persistence, and graduation of low-income first-generation students. A native of Laredo, Texas, Rendon's passion is assisting students who, like her, grew up in difficult circumstances with hopes and dreams, but not knowing how to realize them. Rendon is credited with developing the theory of validation, which colleges around the world try to employ and utilize as a framework for working with and affirming students of low income. Dr. Rendon, thank you so much for joining us here today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Nina. I'm going to share my screen. And here we go. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
All right, perfect. I want to thank, of course, Nina Nassar for the very, very kind invitation to join all of you on this beautiful morning. And we're here already in July and on the brink on starting a new academic year with 2020 behind us, a hellish year, so to speak. But one that brought many lessons and as well as many challenges that, of course, we need to address in higher education. I always like to start off a little bit with a little bit about my background and how I step into this discussion about student success, about advising students, about forming relationships with students. On the right, in the black and white photo, that's me in the middle on my 6th birthday. To my right is my little sister, Ileana, who became a high school English teacher. And to my left is my cousin, Elma. This is my 6th birthday in Laredo, Texas, along the US-Mexico border, where my first language was Spanish. I didn't learn to speak English until the 1st grade. And you can see the house where we used to live right behind us. Not a very nice house. And growing up in poverty does many things to you. You don't have the proper nourishment. You don't have role models. You don't grow up around people that have been to college. You don't have the privileges that affluent students have. On the left is the house where I spent my teenage years, 517 Galveston in Laredo, Texas. The house is still there. Every time I go to Laredo, I drive by there just to remember where I come from. In the 60s and 70s, the roads weren't even paved at the time. They're paved now. But at any rate, I share a little bit about me so that you know that the work of student success, particularly for low-income first-generation students, is not just an academic exercise for me. I'm coming at this having lived the experience of a low-income student, a first-generation student, the first in my family to go to college. There are 6 important issues that I want to cover with you today as we begin to think about navigating a post-pandemic new normal. And this all relates to, of course, equity and inclusion issues. The first one is to understand the unjust structures in society and how they create persistent inequality. As educators, I think we need to know the literature, to know what's going on in terms of what creates inequality, what makes for the difference between affluent students and low-income first-generation students. The equity point here for advisors, for faculty, for anyone involved in forming a validating relationship with students is that low-income students are disproportionately impacted by unequal societal structures. You see, wealthy, privileged students, they have a head start in life. But for low-income students, there's always been unequal opportunities, even predating the pandemic. But now that opportunity is out of reach more than ever before. The pandemic did something to us. It stole a little bit of our lives. The overall life expectancy in 2018 was 78.7 years, but at the end of 2020, it went down about 2 years. This is from an NPR study that I read. For African Americans, however, that even went down. The life expectancy shortened by 3.3 years, and for Latinx people, 3.9 years. So we have a situation here where chaotic things happen in 2020, and wealth and all societal inequalities became very pronounced, very pronounced. We're still learning from all of that, but I think we need to serve then as advocates for justice and equity for students, standing up for them, understanding that these inequalities exist. And we need to just not know that they're there, be aware that they're there, that's important, but we need to work to eliminate these structural disparities that work against student success. Here are some examples of what I mean. Today we have persistent school funding inequalities. The nonprofit at Build noted that non-white school districts in the US get $23 billion less than white districts, despite serving the same number of students. That's $23 billion less. That's a tremendous inequality between white and predominantly white and non-white school districts. Then there's also been persistent school segregation. It's as if Brown v. Board of Education never existed, with Black and Latinx students more likely to attend schools with mostly poor students, while white and Asian students are attending middle-class schools that are well-funded. And these are schools that have credentialed teachers, that have state-of-the-art books and curricular materials, laboratories and technology tools. All of these facilitate college preparedness. I was one of these kids, as you saw from the photos, that attended a low-income school. We didn't have credentialed teachers. We didn't have state-of-the-art materials in laboratories. We just made do with what we had. In fact, in the US Southwest, in Laredo, along the US-Mexico border, it's very hot around this time of the year. It's very hot in April and May. We're talking 100-degree temperatures. We had no air conditioning, no air conditioning. And that's, we just thought that that was the way it was. We thought everybody lived that way. And we didn't have air conditioning in the home. We didn't have air conditioning in the schools. So that's just one of the examples of the inequalities that I'm talking about. And then it's not just in schools, but also in college. Persistent college segregation, where whites have captured most of the enrollment at the 468 most selective and well-funded four-year colleges, while African Americans and Hispanics are mostly located in increasingly overcrowded and under-resourced open access 2- and 4-year colleges. There's also persistent wealth inequality, where people of color have assets of less value than whites. and their families have little to no income or status that can be transferred to their children. This is true for me growing up. There were no assets that could be transferred from my family to me. I had to create my own assets as I grew up. And then there's unequal resources. These resources are not available to all students. Not everybody has, for example, well-educated parents and the ability to go to well-resourced schools. Not everybody has high-speed internet access at home or web-enabled devices. The digital divide still exists in America. And we see that digital divide, especially in rural areas and in low-income areas. People are struggling to survive. Even before the pandemic, low-income students were struggling to help put food on the table, to help sick family members, and to take care of more than one child at home. So we've got to be aware of these structural inequalities and how they play out in terms of a student attending college from a low-income area. The second issue is that higher education student body is becoming more complex, and we need to be aware of these changes. And as we look into the future, we're beginning to see these changes. Even right now, the future is touching us now. So the equity point here is that the nation is getting more diverse in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, citizenship status, and age. And these demographic changes are adding complexity to the college student body, and student identities are intersectional in nature. The action here that we need to take is not only to understand the demographics, but to prepare to work with this very complex student body. Let me stop here and ask you, how old do you think that you will be in the year 2050? And if you could post the number in the chat function, that would be good. And I'm going to ask Nina to kind of
I'm
sort
gonna
through
look,
those.
yeah. Mhm.
And so the question here is, how old are you? How old do you think you're going to be in 2050? So maybe some quick mathematical calculations.
We've got some.
Nina,
We've got some answers. So
all right.
80, David's 80. We got lots of 80s. We got a 90, 74, 63. Gina's 70. Nicole 70.
Oh.
So
Those 70 people, you're
Martha
youngsters
said,
right now.
Martha said dead. Veronica 70. Okay. Corey 61.
Right.
Corey, you're
Okay.
a puff.
Okay.
Lindsay.
That's
108, fine. Gloria.
108.
Okay.
Oh my God bless you. All right.
No, someone's saying I'm feeling depressed.
Well,
Oh.
Don't feel too depressed. I'm probably going to be in my late 90s around that time. And, I'm not sure that I will be here to see, 2045, 2050, but many of you will. Many of you will. It's an exciting year because sometime between 2044 and 2050, no one race or ethnic category will be in the majority in the United States. You can see these two pie charts representing the year 2012 and the year 2050. And you can see in the yellow, the non-Latino white population shrinking from 63% to 48.2%. And you can see the growth of the people of color population. But by 2050 or so, no one will be a majority. Everybody will be under 50%. And we're beginning to see some of that right now. The future is touching us now. Even in states like California and New Mexico and Texas and New York, we're already seeing majority minority states. So the student body, based on these changes, is becoming more complex. And we need to understand their complexities and the challenges that these students face that compromise their potential for success. In terms of race, it's not just black and white anymore. We're seeing the growth of multiracial students. And these students are embracing their intersectional multiple identities. Some of these identities have a positive impact and others are negative depending on context. And I always think about the story of, this was in the 1990s. I was a professor at Arizona State University. I was supposed to go to Purdue University to do an assessment of the culture for diversity at Purdue. So here I land in Indianapolis, and I'm getting my bags at the airport. And all of a sudden, this man comes up to me and in a t-shirt and jeans and says, where are you coming from? And I was like, well, who are you? I was just like, why are you asking me this question? And I said, you need to identify yourself. So he pulls out a badge. He's a federal officer. And of course, everybody's looking and staring. And this is a very embarrassing kind of thing. And so I said, why are you stopping me and not everybody else? And he says, well, we have information that Hispanic women are bringing drugs into this area. So here are my identities, that I had going there. I was a professor, I was Latina, I was a woman, I was a consultant. But the only thing that he saw was the identity of being a woman and that I was Latina. And then he added a third identity that I didn't even have, because in his mind, these connect, drug dealer. So here, that's an example of when identities have a positive and a negative impact, depending on context. I mean, when I go to Purdue, I'm kind of a star, I'm the consultant, and everybody's embracing me. When I land at the airport, it's a whole different story. So the challenges for students of color, racism, discrimination, stereotyping, violence, micro and macroaggressions, and the lack of a sense of belonging. And we need to understand that these things can play out, not only in society, but in colleges and universities as well. In terms of gender, very interesting developments, not just he or she anymore. In the old days, that's how we taught. Now we see students using terms like gender fluid, genderless, trigender, cisgender. Some of the challenges for gender nonconforming students: bullying, discrimination, gender violence, harassment, not feeling safe. And then for sexual orientation, very interesting developments as well, not just heterosexual or homosexual. Now there are terms such as asexual, pansexual, demisexual. In fact, there's a study that shows that 1/3 of individuals aged 18 to 34 identified as something other than totally heterosexual. So they're kind of moving along, the middle between homosexual and heterosexual. Challenges for sexual minorities include bullying, suicide, non-acceptance, depression, and anxiety. So we are very interestingly redefining race and ethnicity in America. We've got a new demographic future coming our way. I have a short, about 4-minute film that I want to show, and I'm going to ask Nina to show it, that exemplifies what I'm talking about. So here's the video.
Peruvian, Chinese on my dad's side.
My father is Portuguese.
The number of young Americans with mixed race and ethnicity is rising real fast in the United States. Many are going to college, helping to bridge racial and ethnic divides on campuses nationwide.
On my mom's side, I'm Irish, German, French, Cherokee, and Shawnee.
My mother is Haitian and African American.
Statistics on race and ethnicity are used by government agencies to assess discrimination against minority groups. There are 4 major classifications of race in the United States: white, black, Asian, and American Indian. These classifications are mostly based on skin color. Most sociologists say this way of classifying people is not science, but they say it is obsolete.
And I think the idea that race has this kind of historical precedent, that it's related to skin color and the kind of genes that you have and all of this sort of thing, that is kind of an old-fashioned idea.
There's very little biological difference between the 4 groups.
Sims says determining ethnicity is just as problematic, but generally it's related to country of origin, ancestry, and shared language. Hispanic, for instance, is an ethnicity, not a race.
Hispanic is attached to people whose origins can be traced to countries where there was Spanish conquest. So they are Spanish-speaking countries.
So you can be a Hispanic and be a race. So you can be a Hispanic white, you can be a Hispanic black, you can be a Hispanic Asian. So it's complicated.
There's been a steep, rapid rise in the number of multiracial, multi-ethnic young people now living in the United States. Many of these kids are going to college. The opportunity for higher education was not there for many of their parents.
Encounters with people of different race do tend to change stereotypes that people have.
Because a lot of times for students coming to college for the first time, it's the first time we've really been placed in such a diverse and different environment.
Rita's heritage is Chinese. She was born and raised in the United States. Arib and Munir are also students born and raised in America.
I identify myself first as a Muslim, so then I identify myself from where I was born and raised and where I originally come from. So I guess you can say I'm Muslim, American, Bengali. Rita,
Arib, and Munir say discrimination still exists, even among fellow students, but it's more subtle and many times even unintentional.
For example, they might ask if I own a 7-Eleven or a taxi or something along these lines.
Most time people assume that I'm usually Pakistani or Indian, but I'm actually Sri Lankan.
Rita says another question loaded with cultural cluelessness is when she's asked if she's Chinese or American.
I'm both of these, and I don't think I necessarily have to pick. And I think that's a lot of the experiences with people of color, right? You're always trying to strive towards, I think, being American, when really how I've made sense of my identity is that I'm both, and that's okay.
And it's okay with a rapidly growing segment of the U.S. population.
The 3-year-olds in the United States, one of the youngest groups in the United States, now have fewer whites than other racial and ethnic minorities. And of course, as those 3-year-olds get to be 4-year-olds and the people that follow them continue to age up, we're going from the bottom up, from the young up to the old. We're going to become much more global and much more racially and ethnically diverse.
Am I Chinese or am I American? But really, I'm both of these.
All right, so we're heading into an exciting and yet complex time. So let's see, how do I get back to my screen here? All right. So I've talked about the importance of understanding these demographic shifts and the complexity of the student body.
Dr. Rendon, do you want me to share your slides?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm on issue 3. Okay.
Yes.
All right, there we go. So you'll be moving them on over there?
Sure.
Nina? Okay. So the third issue is to understand the college experience for first-generation low-income students. This is important because nearly a third of undergraduates are first-generation students. So we've got a lot of these students that have a background similar to me, pretty much the first in their family to go to college, often not having role models at home, often not knowing the culture of higher education, often not having the finances to go full time. So let's learn a little bit about this college experience. The next slide, please. The equity point here is that the life and college experiences of first-generation low-income students are not the same as wealthy privileged students. And the action that we need to take is to understand and work to eradicate the barriers that underserved students face to navigate college. So let me explain that college experience and what I've learned from my research about how students navigate college. Next slide, please. This is an interesting study that I just saw in Inside Higher Education that really accentuates why we need to understand the college experience. The rate at which students stayed enrolled at a post-secondary institution, that dropped by 2 percentage points last fall. Just students are reevaluating whether college is for them, especially at this time where, their families lost jobs, where they struggled to survive, where they stood in line at long food banks. The sharpest drops were for part-time students, underrepresented racial groups, low-income students, older students, community college students, and look here, Latinx students, that was the largest drop in persistence, 3.2%. Rate for Black, white, and Asians, that fell by half of that amount. Next slide, please. I just want to share a little bit about a study that we did to examine the college experience for Latinx students at the University of Texas, San Antonio. And we wanted to learn what was positive and negative about the experience, and then what were the strengths that the students employed to become survivors and to move past obstacles. We interviewed 47 students in focus groups, and out of those 47, we chose 6 to do one-on-one videotaped interviews. Next slide. So here's the transition to college for these students. On the left, you can see the worlds of the students, the world of their family, their peers, their work, their spiritual work, their spiritual world, their communities, and then their native countries. Sometimes they were coming from Mexico or Bolivia or Puerto Rico. So those are their familiar worlds. They're coming to college, which is an unfamiliar world. And as they go to college, they're experiencing a number of challenges. First of all, they have to dislocate and relocate. And as they do that, they experience what Gloria Nasaldúa would call un choque, a cultural collision, a collision between their worlds and the new world of college. The new world of college brings these challenges for students: separation anxiety. Sometimes males were the man of the house. They felt guilty that they were not there to help their mother anymore. Same thing for women. They were maybe taking care of their brothers and sisters and they weren't there. They felt guilty too that they were leaving some of their friends behind. In college, sometimes they experience what are called in the literature microaggressions. These are small jabs that are hurtful. For example, what's that food you're eating? It smells terrible. Why are you speaking Spanish on the phone? What is that music that you're listening to? Those are microaggressions. And then college readiness. They may not have gone to the best school that prepared them for college. Sometimes they had advising issues, not being placed in the right program of study. College affordability, having the finances to attend college, was a big issue. And then liminality, a fancy word for being in an in-between space. One foot in their familiar college worlds, familiar worlds like family, native country, community, and another foot in this brand new world of college. So it's being caught in this in-between space, wanting to be in both. It's a space of tension and space of liminality. Next slide. So here's a student talking about living in these multiple worlds. Go ahead.
It's different, very different. I see it as I have my college life and I have my personal life. When I'm at school, I'm like in school motion. I know how to speak to people about courses and how to do projects and what I plan to do for the future. I want to go to graduate school. I want to do this and that. When I'm with my parents, there's no school talk other than how you doing and how long it's going to take for you to graduate. I don't think they fully understand what I actually do at school. All they see is that I'm going to school and I've been married, I don't have any kids. How long is that going to take? That's pretty much what I'm gaining from my parents. And I just think they just don't know. So it's like two different worlds. I live in multiple worlds.
And here's the student talking about the challenges faced by men of color.
I think this kind of traces back to culture. A lot of things that we as males in college-wise is that sometimes we have other priorities, other responsibilities. For example, at a very young age, we are very accustomed to just going into just doing any kind of labor. So we have to work to provide for our family. I myself found myself in that situation when I lost my father. Thank God that we had my stepfather, but sometimes there was ways where I had to step in as kind of take care of my mother or my brother. And so because of that reason, I think we sort of have to draw away from some of our aspirations or dreams, and we kind of have to place responsibilities and priorities in place. And we do that by saying, well, as much as I would want to go to get a college education, I have to work to provide for my family.
So there you can see some of the challenges that these students face, and it's something that many educators don't understand. They believe that everybody's starting at the same starting line, and they are not. The next issue is the importance of establishing caring, validating relationships with students. Next slide. The equity point here is the importance of validating students and fostering a sense of caring and belonging, especially during the time of the pandemic. We've learned that relationships are critical, foundational to us. We're relational human beings. We want to be with others. The action here is to work with a validation-rich academic and student support system to create what Faircloth calls rightful presence. Next slide. This is a theory of validation that I created back in the 90s. And this is really about us, not the students, us taking the initiative to reach out to students, to help them believe in themselves that you can do this, and I'm here, and my role is to care about you, to make sure that you're going to succeed. That's basically the essence of validation theory. Next slide. Let me ask you here, what are some of the key challenges that your students are facing at your institution? And if you could post, one or two of those challenges in the chat function, that would be good. And as you do those, Nina will review them and call out a few. But think about, what are some of the challenges that your students are facing right now?
Transportation, depression, anxiety, childcare, digital divide, technology, work schedule in school, time management, family responsibilities, hands-on oriented, needing to work, food insecurity, academic stress, knowledge in navigating technology, cost of developmental education, lots of housing insecurity, lots of childcare coming in.
Childcare, yeah. Yeah, I mean, these are probably some of the reasons that we're seeing this drop in students staying in college and returning, to college, is that they have so many responsibilities right now, so many complexities, in their households that they have to deal with. And so, next slide, please. So the issue here is that, we need to, reach out. And I've learned during the pandemic that validation is also a healing tool and a spacious view of love. There's a beautiful poem by Rumi, and I know some of you know Rumi, many of you. It's called Cry Out in Your Weakness. A dragon was pulling a bear into its terrible mouth, and a courageous man went and rescued the bear. And there are such helpers in the world who rush to save anyone who cries out. Like mercy itself, they run toward the screaming, and they can't be bought off. And if you were to ask one of those, why did you come so quickly? He or she would say, because I heard your helplessness, because I heard your helplessness. And there's so many of us who just reach out to people whenever we see that helplessness. We saw the first responders, we saw doctors and nurses and ordinary people reaching out to help out during the pandemic. Next slide. So this is the need for validation here, for us to become also healing agents, to hear that helplessness, to recognize the traumatic wounds in others, to work with an open heart, being the one that reaches out, to offer mercy, compassion, and care to those who are broken. Next slide. So here are some examples of validating statements and actions that we can engage with as we develop that validating relationship with our students. I'm not going to read all of them, but one really great thing that we can say to students is believe in yourself. You can do this. Many students here have similar backgrounds. They're succeeding. I think you can do this too. Students have said, a faculty member told me, you have what it takes to do science. And that really made me believe I could be a scientist. So there are many, many kinds of statements that we can make to help our students know that they can do this. Because sometimes they come to college feeling, maybe I'm not college material. So let's be that validating agent that cares about students. Next slide. So there's extensive research now. Hold on, Nina, not yet.
Yeah, I'm gonna get the video.
There's extensive research now that shows that validation and relationships work. But I saw this very, very short video of Lizzo, and many of you know Lizzo is a huge pop star, Grammy Award winning entertainer. And when she's asked who made the difference for her, she always refers to her band director, Manny Gonzalez. Here's Lizzo talking about Manny Gonzalez. Go ahead.
He was like, we brought him back.
How you doing?
Oh my God, I'm so good. Oh my God.
I'm very proud of you.
Thank you.
You've been doing good.
Wow, I did it tonight. You told my ass, you were like, get it together, girl, because you are special. Apply yourself. Those moments meant so much to me. Hi.
So there you go. If you don't believe Laura Rendon with validation theory, maybe you can believe Lizzo. That's just really a nice example of how validation works, and people remember it even long before it happened. She remembers Manny Gonzalez. The next issue is the importance of recognizing working with students' strengths, with their assets. You know, sometimes people feel that low-income folks, they have nothing going for them, that it's too overwhelming, they're not gonna make it, that they're lazy, that they don't know anything. They don't recognize that these students and their family are survivors. They've learned to navigate the system. They've learned to put food on the table. And so we wanted to find out in this study, what were their assets? Next slide, please. The equity point here is that underserved students are sometimes viewed as weak and incapable of success. And the action is to avoid working with deficit views of students and to learn to leverage their assets and engage the student relationship through an asset-based framework. Next slide. This is a study that we did with LATINX STEM students. And one of the things that we learned from these students is the challenges that they faced and the assets that they used to overcome these challenges. Next slide. So here's some of the challenges that these students experienced as they were on their journey to become a scientist, to earn that coveted STEM degree. Health-related issues. Some of them left their native country and separated. Undocumented status, racism, lack of information. Next slide. Some of them had language issues. Some of them had challenges with presentations and writing for scientific journals. They dealt with academic culture shock, some of the things that I talked about earlier. They lived with limited resources. They had family-related issues, having to contribute to the family and taking care of their siblings. And then gender-related issues, sometimes being the only person of color or the only woman in class. So these are some of the challenges that these students experienced. Next slide. But then they had some phenomenal assets that I believe that many educators don't understand and don't recognize, unfortunately. The asset of resistance. I mean, they did everything that they could to resist it, and you know, these negative things coming at them, the racism, the micro and macroaggressions, the poverty, they resisted those. Resilience, their strength and determination, their navigational competence, they figured things out. They figured out how to navigate the institution. Perseverance, what Jaime Escalante called ganas, you know, the determination that they wanted to get that STEM degree. A sense of curiosity and wonder and awe. And this beautiful, beautiful asset that I've seen in not just STEM students, but in pretty much any student, giving back. The whole sense that they wanted to earn this degree, not just to hang it on the wall. I mean, that's nice, but they wanted to earn the degree to give back to their communities, to serve as role models for their brothers and sisters, to make this world a better place to be. Next slide. So here's some examples of giving back. Rodolfo Jimenez says, I'm grateful for all the mentors I've had in my life. I feel it's their guidance that has helped me to be where I am today. I'll never forget this. And that is why I take it upon myself to make sure that I give back to my community as well as the world in any way that I can. Diana del Angel says, I hope to give back to my community and take my learned experiences back to South Texas. And Marina Suarez says, the opportunity to give back to the community that I grew up in has been one of the most rewarding parts of my job. We need to leverage this asset of giving back by giving students projects that help them to work in their communities so that they can see that what they're learning is actually making a difference. Next slide. The last issue is the importance of us attending to our own healing, our own self-care, and our own well-being. We learned this, and this was highlighted so much during the pandemic, as you all talk about how students are going through depression and just feeling burned out and overwhelmed. Faculty and staff are going through these same issues as well. And this is a time, I think, to be gentle with ourselves, to know that, we just experienced something extraordinary, this sudden change that came to us. We need to just step back and say, whoa, let me take care of myself. And so the work that we do is so important. We can't do this work if we're feeling stressed out and burned out. Next slide. So the work of success is made more difficult if we're exhausted, if we're afraid and overwhelmed. Work is not all that matters. So the action here is to take time for rest, healing, reflection, and replenishment, and attend to our overall well-being. Next slide. So we're leaving 2020. We're actually now kind of in the middle of 2021. And there were things to be learned from 2020. I mean, it was a chaotic experience, but there were lessons embedded in that experience. Can you list one thing that you learned from the experience of 2020? What was one thing that you learned that came to you and it just, was highlighted for you? And if you could post that one thing, what would that be?
Patience. Susie says patience.
Patience,
Compassion, prioritizing mental health, teamwork, that students can be very resilient, that I can connect with students on Zoom. I need human contact. We are more alike than we think. Flexibility for our students. Kindness is always appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
Getting more sleep really helps.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing those. And I reflected on the experience of 2020. And as we were starting in January of 2021, this was when Joe Biden was being inaugurated as the new president. I wrote this poem, which I call The Gifts of 2020. It is often said that hindsight is 2020. A retrospective for year 2020 is in order. On a journey toward wisdom, one inevitably learns a paradoxical truth. It is when we experience the most suffering, the most angst, that our greatest life lessons emerge. Perhaps it was a higher power that selected our generation to merit a worldwide emergency of epic proportions, to be placed squarely in an oppositional liminal space where warriors meet terror, where hope meets despair, where joy meets sorrow. We became the chosen people to receive the gifts born of trauma. The gift of interrelatedness. My survival is related to your well-being. The gift of relationships. Our closeness can remain strong, even with separation. The gift of a sorrowful, broken heart. Our hearts breaking open to receive the truth of our existence and the infinite possibilities that lie before us. The gift of mercy. Witnessing the suffering and giving of ourselves with pure tenderness and compassion. The gift of courage. We're on the precipice of creating a new, bold reality. the gift of the Christmas star, bringing Jupiter and Saturn together for the first time in 800 years. The gifts of hope, resilience, faith, illuminating the sky. I want to believe that these magical gifts were sent by our ancestors, their illuminative ways of knowing, unveiled for us to see, with 2020 acuity just one more time. On the remote island of Mare, shooting stars are said to carry the deceased to a distant life, and burning with fire, these souls initiate a journey to a new life. In 2020, our souls were set ablaze. We were given cherished gifts to reimagine our collective existence, to heal our personal and collective wounds, to establish a powerful foundation for those coming behind us. And now we are poised to access our starseed essence, gifted with a journey to expand the parameters of our newly found enlightenment. And what we do with these gifts will be our homage of the heart for those no longer with us, whose memory is enshrined in over 400,000 lights on a solemn evening that initiates a new decade and that opens a beginning unlike any other. And so here we are in this new beginning with many lessons that we learn. And what we do with these lessons is going to be very important. We have the opportunity to create a post-pandemic vision of education, of advising, of working with students, of really understanding that so many students need our care and compassion. Thank you so much for everything that all of you do. And it's been a pleasure for me to share my work with you this morning. Muchísimas gracias. And I'm going to turn it over to Nina. Thank you, Nina.
Thank you, Dr. Rendon. That was absolutely beautiful, beautiful poem, amazing art. Thank you so much. We have 5 minutes if anybody wants to pose one question. You're getting a lot of thank yous here, Dr. Rendon.
Thank you.
Your work is amazing. We strive every day to meet some of the things that you're saying. So really, I can just see a lot of thank yous coming in. So wonderful, excellent, great presentation, really inspiring, great information. I guess there are no questions, Dr. Rendon. So this is, we shall, I really am lost for words. It's a really beautiful presentation. And we're really grateful that you were able to join us this morning.
It's my pleasure, and so great to be with this international audience. And welcome, and it's just a real pleasure to know that so many people are engaged in this work. And so thank you so much for the work that all of you do. And I know that there are other colleges, besides Metropolitan, and it's great to be with you as well. Thank you so much.
Dr. Rendon, before I leave, I know that, we have a native of San Antonio here as well. And Dr. Vasquez, I don't know what happened to her audio, but she's been sending me lots of messages. She wants to just say she absolutely adores your work. You're a great mentor to her. And she's really sad that she was unable to get her mic connected, but she's very appreciative of you being here today.
The same here. Thank you so much. And it's just a pleasure to be with all of you. So
the presentation will be recorded, and we will send it out to everyone as well. We do have a few more sessions lined up for today, very exciting ones. Yes, the slides to Primrose, we will be sharing, everything will be recorded. It'll be available on YouTube, and we will share that out. You're welcome. So yes, and so grab a cup of coffee, get started in your morning, and we'll see you at 9:45 for the next session. Thank you so much,
Okay.
Hector says. Thank you.
Thank you. Adios.
Adios.
Best wishes to all of you.
Thank
Great
you,
to
Doc.
see you, Nina. Thank you for all you
Really
do.
good to see you too, Dr. Rendon.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.